So I'm halfway through the first season of the Buccaneers, and as I'm sure the title probably gave it away, I have thoughts about the character of Virginia St. George because whilst I was reeling like Mrs. St. George at Jinny's humiliation of her mother at the party she had thrown for her daughters, I could also see how society, inclusive of her mother, by the way, had slowly laid the stage and set up Jinny for the situation she found herself in the Buccaneers season 1, episode 4. And so I figured, why not talk about it? Now, for those who might just be hearing about this show for the first time, The Buccaneers follows 5 friends, Jinny and Nan St. George, Lizzie and Mabel Elmsworth, and Conchita Clausen, all upper middle class American socialites who are navigating their introduction into British high society by virtue of Conchita's marriage to Richard Marrable, aka Lord Blightonsea, who on their wedding day invites her friends to England for their introduction into society, where they would then get the opportunity to hopefully marry within British nobility. Which I realize that a lot of people in their critiques of Jinny tend to ignore, but we'll get to that shortly. The Buccaneers is an adaptation of Edith Wharton's incomplete novel of the same name and is the second adaptation that's been done so far of the novel. The first is a 5-episode miniseries that was released back in 1995. As with a lot of Edith Wharton's stories, it examines the lives of young women living right smack dab in the middle of the Gilded Age and everything that comes with the intermarrying between British nobility in search of wealth and the American socialites who are so inclined to buy their way into that class. And we see this reflected in the plot of the show. So far, The Buccaneers has only 2 seasons. Season 1 is 8 episodes long, and after reaching the halfway point, I figured I had a good enough handle on the character of Jinny St. George because I think it's a pretty fair assessment for me to make based on people's opinions about her character that a lot of the Buccaneers watchers are a tad bit harsh on Jinny and her choices. And as you're very well aware of what I like to do on my channel when I'm watching period pieces, I like to consider exactly the situation, the time frame within which these women exist, and how that often does govern the choices that they then make. And as much as Nan has that all not like other girls bit going for her, I find myself a bit more partial to Jinny. Because in her, I see the absolute tragedy that is a beautiful young girl who has been programmed all her life to want one thing and be perceived a certain way in order to get that thing, and how those roles have come with a heavy price that is the piece of shit husband that she's now saddled with. And yes, I know, her words to her mother were absolutely horrid at the homecoming party that Mrs. St. George threw for her daughters, but I cannot in good conscience watch that scene and not have my heart break for both Party St. George and Jinny, who are more alike than they first appear, saddled with men who do nothing but humiliate and manipulate them, whilst they are stuck on the ride that is the respectability that their womanhood demands for them to maintain the facade that is the role they have to play. Wife and mother in the case of Patty St. George, and wife and soon-to-be mother in the case of Jinny. I think for a lot of people that find Jinny's actions unforgivable and are so quick to judge and damn her, I always wonder if maybe they wouldn't be served well by going back to episode 1 of season 1 and giving it another rewatch, because the pilot episode does a lot in setting up Jinny's fears and inadequacies and how they drive her. There's something about a girl that young. She's meant to be 17, I think, which is why she's the one being presented first and not Nan, who is younger and disinterested in all the ball and the glamour, and what she rightfully calls out is a way to judge and measure the young ladies like they are chattel of some sort. But as I was saying, there's something to be said about a girl that young being basically reduced to the pretty one. Her worth is tied to her appearance and how that would be what secures her a good match. It is why she's so intense in her competition with Lizzie and why she's so furious when it looks like James chose Lizzie over her. And it is also what enables James to be able to set things up in a way that Jinny would be absolutely tied to him whilst he continues to abuse, manipulate and gaslight her, and why every time he does so, she still comes back to him. even when he pushes her to publicly humiliate her mother, whilst painting himself as the good guy, the good son-in-law. James does so by tying the act to her being able to meet his needs and satisfy his desires as her husband, all of which is all geared towards buffing up his own ego. I think that the way we're introduced to Jinny and her clear desire and goal to be seen as perfect in time for their introduction into high society is meant to serve as one, an avenue for Jinny to secure an aristocratic husband, yes, but it's also meant to be a way to affirm her worth. That even though she might not be as brilliant and witty as her younger sister Nan, whose intelligent vivacity and sense of humor does always catch everyone's attention. I mean, Jinny entered the Brightlingsea manor with her eyes set on James, who was also being pushed by his mother to get with one of the St. George girls for their family's fortune. And at the dinner table on their very first night, it was Nan's quick wit that caught everyone's attention, especially James. He notices her, and Jinny notices that he has eyes on her sister. And when the conversation, which was kicked off by Nan talking about the artwork, comes around to Jinny, she comes up with a blank and can only praise the subject's arms. And she's humiliated because she can read what the silence that followed her words is clearly telling her. That she isn't cultured enough to be there. I honestly think that if you keep that in mind and watch her actions for the rest of the season, then it becomes clear that Jinny St. George throughout season 1 is desperate to fit in, to be seen, to be chosen. Because based off of her conversation with her mother, that is what she's meant to be. She is meant to marry well. She has the beauty, she has the wealth to make that happen. Except she isn't the only young woman present in the house with beauty and wealth both. The Elmsworth sisters are there too. Her younger sister, who we can tell she's always been jealous of, is also there. I mean, does anyone else really believe that her slip up to Nan about Nan not being their mother's biological daughter is an accident? Clearly, she was upset and wanted to lash out and had the ammunition to do so. But as I was saying, she isn't the only young woman present in the house who has the beauty and wealth to capture the attention of the piece of asswipe that is James. And because all her life she's been programmed to want that, to need that. Hell, her mother echoes her plans for her to be just the perfect woman to snag her man. Then it makes her primed to be manipulated by James, who decides to toy with her by switching his attention briefly to Lizzie Elmsworth, who he then proceeds to sexually degrade in a way that breaks her and, as she later tells Guy, makes her feel shame. And that is something that Lord James Seadown wields well on a young Jinny who, prior to meeting him, has been primed for just that level of abuse. When all your life you've been told to focus on your beauty, your posture, your elegance, and how those are the tools that would net you the husband you desire, then it means that all you are is meant to serve that one purpose, to serve the man you are meant to eventually capture and marry. And piece of shit James sees that in Jinny, which is why after he's done his power play and broken Lizzie, he comes back to Jinny to propose to her because she's more malleable. Of course, after hinting quite clearly that he expects her to behave and comport herself in a certain way, Jinny starts to change. Because I repeat, that is who she was raised to be. That's all she's ever known, all she's ever wanted. I think The Buccaneers is also a cautionary tale about how we can lose ourselves in marriage. And if any of y'all would love for me to do a video on that, please let me know in the comment, because I can talk endlessly about that, especially as it pertains to Conchita. The fact that episode 4 has Patty being humiliated by her daughter because of James manipulating Jinny into doing so, and then being humiliated by her husband, who just cannot keep his wandering penis in his pants. And when at the end of the episode she tells him that she wants to leave him, he basically tells her that she can because she cannot survive without him. It's not just about material or financial support. It's also because her marriage to him has become such a core part of her identity that she can't think to separate from it. Now, would she eventually do so? I think so. The show's been clearly sowing the seeds, especially in Patty St. George's conversation with Mrs. Elmsworth about their husband. So, yes, eventually she would. At the moment, though, she most likely won't. Because whilst modern sensibilities makes this a very easy decision to make within the time and context wherein the show is set, it becomes very difficult, extra so for Jinny. If her new husband is to be her end all be all and she's been conditioned to want that marriage, the prestige that comes with marrying into the British aristocracy, then there is a level of vulnerability that puts her in, where she's then reliant on this man that she's chosen as her husband. The only problem is that she made a terrible choice and she would have to come to terms and live with that. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that she eventually leaves him, of course, but as at episode 4, I can see why she's following his lead in all of this, even when James is actively alienating her from her family and her friends. For a young girl like Jinny, who's been raised to believe that it is her duty to revolve around her husband, that her being able to secure a good match is tied directly to her worth, then isn't it logical that what said husband desires will factor actively into how she chooses to live her life and the action she does, even when they bring such hurt and shame to her mother and herself? That scene made me angry, not at Jinny, who was being manipulated, but at her piece of shit husband, James. And a part of me wonders if a ton of people who hate Virginia St. George so much aren't doing so more from the perspective of their dislike for her and her being more aligned to the wants and desires of the women of her time than it is at her words and actions at the homecoming party, because we see the why of it. But of course, that's just beyond my thoughts. I would, as always, love to hear yours. Please drop them down in the comments below. Like this video if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet. Share it if you want. Support me on Patreon if you can. And until tomorrow's video, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.